Welcome to another 21 Hats Dashboard brought to you by our sponsor, The Great Game of Business. I'm Lauren Feldman, and I'm here with Gene Marks. Welcome, Gene.
Hello, Lauren.
How you doing this week?
Doing good, actually. Winding down the summer, getting ready to do some traveling as well. But we'll have lots to talk about.
You're always doing traveling.
Not in August. It's been slow in August.
Oh, okay.
Because I got it. People are enjoying their families, and then but then it picks up in September. I forgot if I told you I'm going to spend the month of January in London again. So that should be.
You did mention that. That's very cool.
We can be doing these conversations while I'm there. I'd like to do more reporting on how UK businesses are faring in this world.
I like it.
But anyway, topic for another time.
How about this topic, Gene? I'm really curious about the proposals that are floating around about not taxing tipped income. What do you think of that?
Let me explain it first, and I'm going to be writing about this, I think, in the next week or two. But and so I'm glad you brought the topic up because it helps me formulate my thoughts. So both candidates, Vice President Harris and former President Trump, have proposed not taxing tipped income. Now, right now, tips are taxable, and they're supposed to be reported. God only knows how much tips are actually reported or not reported in this world. I mean, it might not even be a thing because people don't report tips, but most restaurants have a requirement to report, income for their employees, particularly their states. So they have to track tips, and so it's a taxable thing. So,
well, Gene, let me say, I assume, Gene, that the less we all use cash, the more those tips end up being reported.
You're exactly right. So there's a record of it. And again, restaurants themselves or service business are required to report tip income that their employees received. So it's out there. I mean, the only time it gets away, I remember my daughter when she waitressed for a number of years and was always like, yeah, we like getting tips in cash. So that way nobody knows about it. You know what I mean? So that's a little bit of advice for you, by the way. If you want to really make a friend of your server, tip them in cash. They love you for that rather than just writing it on the check, So both candidates want to eliminate taxes on tips. And it's kind of a redonkulous idea, to be honest, Lauren, because and let me explain to you why this is. I mean, it's such political pandering on both sides, because they know there's a lot of younger workers, a lot of younger voters that are out there that would be like, oh, yay, no taxes on my tip income. And you would originally think like, okay, well, that's nice because these people work hard and, and that would benefit them. And you could even make a case that for a business owner, not taxing tips is good. It encourages people. You would probably tip more. The more people tip, the compensation that your employees are receiving through tips, the less pressure there is on the business owner, right, to pay even a minimum wage. So, they can go out there and, if they feel like, good, please tip my employees so I don't have to pay them more. So, that would seem like a good thing, but not taxing tips it goes well beyond that. I mean, for starters, it's very discriminatory. I mean, imagine you're trying to attract hourly workers to your manufacturing business or to your, distribution business. And now you've got a whole industry, this service industry where those people you're going after will be like, screw that, man. I'll go and I'll work, in the service industry and my income won't be taxed because it's mostly tip income. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think it really works against people in other industries. You were going to say?
Well, I was going to say, I think it's even worse than that. I agree with everything you just said, but you would know more about this than I would. But my understanding is that there's real concern that people in other industries would start changing the way people are compensated and start pretending that people are getting tip income to avoid taxes, even when it really isn't a tip.
Dude, you missed your calling. You should have been an accountant, Lauren. You really should, because you're exactly right. That was the next thing. Besides it being discriminatory, defining what a tip is. Can you imagine? I mean, for starters, like every business owner would have all this incentive to just redefine all compensation as tips. Why? Because your employees don't get taxed on it, and then as a business owner, you don't have to pay employer taxes on it either. You could even go to your employees and be saying to them like, hey, you're getting all this income now that's not being taxed, so I can even give you a little bit less, so save money for myself. there's all reasons to screw around with the definition of tips. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And I can just see like you're in a coffee shop and you're like, oh no, I don't compensate my employees. I just collect money from my customers all day and reimburse my employees for the tips that they received. I mean, it just seems so abusive. And then enforcing it has got to be a major nightmare. I mean, it does make me laugh that political candidates can just make these sweeping gestures like, yes, we're going to eliminate tips on taxes on tipped income. And then they then have the agencies then have to figure out how the fuck this is going to work in real life. You know what I mean? And doing that is just it's just a can of worms defining what that income is. So I just think it's a bad idea all around. I think both candidates, they're saying it because they're trying to attract that voter, but I think it's a dopey idea.
My guess is it's a dopey idea that has no hope of going anywhere.
Yeah.
I kind of hope that's the case. If it were to go somewhere, the other thing that I don't like about it is that the tip system is a terrible system to begin with, and this would just further entrench it, which seems pretty crazy too.
You're right. And by the way, again, getting back to the advice that you gave me a few weeks ago, when I do write about this, I'd like to offer some alternatives. What really should be going on, and there's really two things that I would offer. Number one is, rather than going through all this rigmarole of like taxing tips, or maybe national legislation banning tips, like no more tips in this country. Not allowed to do that. Employers have to pay what they got to pay. And if they have to raise prices by 20%, what's the difference anyway? Because we're paying 20% more, in tips, and that way, so many countries do it this way. I mean, get rid of tips. That's one alternative, right?
I like that in part because, there are lots of restaurants that have tried to go to a no tipping system. And I guess it's worked for some, but many have reversed because they were losing employees who could make more money at another restaurant where they would get tipped. If it's outlawed for everybody, that ceases to be a problem.
It does. And it really levels the playing field as well. And some restaurants do better than others. And again, getting back to my daughter when she was a server, I mean, people used to fight over certain shifts on certain days because those were like when the most traffic was, and they would get better tips, at those times. So it really just uncomplicates a lot of things. Just ban tips already. So that's number one. Or if you're going to have tips, then raise the minimum wage on tips. Like in Pennsylvania, I think it's $2.15 or $2.85 is like the minimum. Can you imagine? It's the minimum wage you pay, and if your tips don't reach the state's minimum wage, which is $7.25 an hour, then you have to pay, you got to make up the difference, which is complicated and dopey and still underpaying people as well. So not that I'm a huge fan of minimum wages. I know you're ready to sink your claws into that.
that thought was occurring to me, Gene.
Yeah, I know that, but I'm like, listen, it could be the other alternative. I'm less of a fan of not taxing tips. So just then enough. We already have minimum wage, then increase the minimum wage if you want people to get paid more. I would rather go that. At least there's a system in place to do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So anyway.
All right. We solved that one. Let's talk about a piece that you wrote last week that I was surprised to see because you've consistently warned us that AI has unbelievable promise, but isn't necessarily ready for prime time yet.
Right.
But you wrote a piece saying that for manufacturers, at least, and a few other businesses, you'll tell us which ones, it's starting to get real. Tell us about that.
It is starting to get real. And I also just want to be clear, like, while AI is still very much in its early days and most small businesses are really doing their thing with, ChatGPT and, those generative AI chatbots, that does not take away the fact that AI is coming and becoming more and more real every day. And so when I go out and I speak to these groups, like, for example, I'm speaking in a few weeks, like in September, to a manufacturing group on AI. This is what motivates me to write this stuff. Because then I'm like, okay, well, shit, I got to tell them what's going on in AI for manufacturers. So you do your research and you write about it. I write about it for Forbes, and there's a lot going on in AI. And let me explain what I mean. When you dig into it, I mean, there were like, I can't even count them up. There's got to be like a dozen companies I mentioned alone in the field of robotics, that are like Walmart right now has autonomous forklifts, And Amazon has little human-shaped warehouse robots, and other companies. I mentioned some in this column: Agility Robotics, 1X, Boston Dynamics, Aptronic. And I just did a handful of these. They literally are manufacturing these humanoid robots that can walk and carry stuff and find safety issues and patrol warehouses. They can actually do things like clean and disinfect. I mentioned they can carry it around. They can sort parcels as well. I mean, and these are like in existence. Like if you look at my Forbes column, you'll see. I mean, again, I list a bunch of companies here that are making these robots. Now, they're not cheap. I mean, they're tens of thousands of dollars each for these things, but they're coming down in price quite a lot. And in all honesty, their abilities, because they're powered by AI capturing video, for example, that can translate into data and text and then perform actions. It's really it's amazing stuff, and that's just the robotics, Lauren. Then I started looking into Internet of Things, and there's a whole bunch of companies that are making IoT sensors, and companies that are using it, like Rolls-Royce. They have like hundreds of sensors on their engines. They're one of the biggest airplane engine manufacturers in the world, and they have AI generated sensors that are listening for any problems and warning of maintenance issues, while planes are up there. And then these big, oil and gas companies that have sensors everywhere to automatically, detect, evaluate, alert, shut stuff down, turn things off if like some flow of liquid or something gets interrupted along the way, or it senses smells or some type of an issue. So I'll stop talking because I'm only halfway through this column. You know what I mean? There's just a lot. There's a lot.
Is there anything in particular that caught your eye that you thought this is something that smaller manufacturers should be jumping into right now?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, yeah. And in fact, the last section of my this column, I talk about consolidating data. The robotic stuff is important. The autonomous vehicles are important. The Internet of Things thing are important. It's all here and being used. But what's really important for smaller companies is their data. I mean, they're using ERP systems, CRM systems. They're capturing data on their machines. They're capturing their data, on their order entry platforms, their barcoding systems, whatever. Everybody's got data all over the place. And people are realizing this. And because of that, there has been now a bunch of startups, and again, I mentioned them in this column, a number of them that are coming up with processes for gathering data from a bunch of different places, putting it into one large language model. No easy feat, by the way, and then coming back and allowing then their customers to then interact with it like ChatGPT. So, they're getting to the point now where you're like, okay, I've got this order from this client, which is similar to another order that I had in the past. What would be the best machine to run this order on? What's the best time of day? Who's the best employee out there, the most productive employee that should be running this job? What would I expect my my gross profit to be on this job if I price it at this amount? And right now, you can't really ask all these questions to one place, but these consolidators are starting to bring together all this data to allow manufacturers to do that. And I warn you, that's still early days. I mean, it's not like you can just go and buy something like this off the shelf. And if you really are desperate for something like this, you're probably going to have to hire one of these companies to do like custom programming for you, and it ain't going to be cheap. But it's heading this way, Lauren. It really is. And these, a lot of these startups, within the next 5-7 years or so, they will have applications that you can download and buy and connect it into your machine and connect it into your ERP platform and other places. And then it will just draw in the data. We'll be able to understand the data, allow you to start training that data, and then like interacting with like this super duper expert on your production floor to get, to advise you as to the best way to run jobs. It's amazing. It's amazing stuff.
The notion of sharing all your data with a startup makes me a little nervous. Is there a reason why it's startups that are focused in this area? This seems like something that all the big companies would want to.
It's great. It's another really good question. So the big companies themselves that are not software companies are building their own large language models. So yeah, I mean, like Caterpillar, for example, and Deere, and companies like them are, but they're spending millions of dollars on building their own large language model to extract.
But what about a company that is a software company? What about Microsoft? Why aren't they providing this to?
Microsoft would tell you. I mean, they don't have anything off the shelf that's doing it. They would point you towards their network of Microsoft partners and developers and say, listen, talk to them. We provide them with a bunch of tools they can use so they can write these applications for you, but you're not going to be able to download something out of the box. And frankly, Microsoft has never really done anything like that. I mean, when you think about the products that Microsoft sells, they have end user applications, business applications, and personal applications. But for anything more complicated than that, they lean on their network, their partner channel. And then they provide this partner channel with all sorts of tools that the typical business owner isn't even aware of, nor would they buy it themselves. But these are tools that programmers can use. And what Microsoft is doing is churning out AI-based tools to help these programmers develop their own large language models and get them trained quicker and more efficient and all of that. So no, you can't really go to Microsoft for that.
All right, then Microsoft was a bad choice. How about a big CRM company? It would seem completely logical that someone who already has a bunch of your data would take this next step.
Another great point. But CRM is CRM. We're talking about manufacturing now. And the data is not just in the CRM system. I mean, this data is in all sorts of—
I know, but it's a start. It's a start. If they've already got that data.
But the CRM companies are busy doing their CRM stuff. You know what I mean?
Okay.
So, they can't do it all. And the thing is, in the manufacturing world, other than the giants like the SAPs and the Oracles, that like for big companies, where again, they're the ones working side by side with these big companies to develop in-house applications. Like any industry, the industry applications or vendors are somewhat fragmented. I mean, there's no like one leader of manufacturing software. There's a handful of good ones, but they're not giant companies. They're nowhere near the size of a Microsoft or even a Google or anything like that. So they're resource challenged as well, and a lot of them are turning to startups and looking to license or buy applications from them that can help them get to the same results. But it still gets back to the startups that are working on them. And it's why this huge amount of VC money, I mean, the majority of VC money in the past 12 months has been going towards AI-based startups. And if you spend a half an hour on Emergence Capital's website, for example, they're one of the VCs that invest heavily in technology startups. You'll see they're all AI-based and they're developing applications like this.
So when will you tell me that one of your many clients has actually adopted one of the things you refer to in this column? How soon?
It'll be
will that
3 to 4 years at the minimum.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, at the minimum, it really would. I think of somebody like a Paul Downs, who, he's a manufacturer, you know what I mean? And
Yep, sure.
at his company, and he clearly, isn't going to develop something like this in-house. I mean, it's a giant undertaking to do, and that's not his specialty, So the question is, when will the niche manufacturing software that he uses for the furniture manufacturing industry, when are they going to make some of these tools available? I mean, geez, they have to involve so many other.
When is he going to be able to hire one of those humanoids you were telling us about?
But even the humanoids that we talk about, that and the ones that can do development work, they all do need supervision and management as well. I think that Paul, though, and I'm picking on Paul for a little bit because I admire him so much, but I think that the humanoid robots, getting back to that, in his place of business, that can maybe act as an autonomous forklift or an autonomous carrier or an autonomous assembler, that's not so far off. But I'll still go 2 to 3 years for something like that. The cost of those robots will have to come down, and then they have to be trained. So it's sort of a big thing. I think in 2 to 3 years, those robots will be at a price where smaller companies like Paul's will be still on the bleeding edge, like playing around with them. And they still won't be completely proven and reliable. And in the end, they might be not worth the time because they're not mature enough. But after that, We just got to be patient and give it some time. And I do think that Paul's company will look a lot different 10 years from now, if he hasn't jumped out the window by then.
All right. So what can we look for from you this week? What are you working on?
Well, I do. I want to write a piece that will be coming out about why Wall Street people are backing Harris, and I think that you'll enjoy it because it is there's some really valid reasons why somebody from Wall Street would back Harris. So that's a piece that final touches are being put on and something that will be available soon. And then I've got all sorts of things I need to write for the Inquirer. That I haven't decided on what the best one is, but I think I want to focus on health benefits and what companies are doing to, what new things companies are doing in 2024 to offer competitive but affordable healthcare. So those are my things I'm working on.
You've had a lot of interest in that in past years, and you've mentioned some stuff in the past. Is there something brand new that you're focused on already that you're going to tell us about?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, that you bring that up, more and more companies are self-insuring, Lauren. They are, and small businesses, and more companies are gravitating towards captive insurance companies. And captive insurance companies are, it's a way for small businesses to join up together in a self-insuring model. And it's proven that if it's managed the right way, it can really save you on your health costs. That's pretty new. A few years ago, it was a big company game, and now it's becoming more of a smaller company benefit. So that's something I'm going to be mentioning.
When do those packets head out that every business gets with their new rates? How close are we to
now, that? Like in the fall, right? Yeah, and it's all just theater. You get all these things, and it's all like Independence Blue Cross says they're going to. Health insurance rate's supposed to go up like 9 to 10% this year. So right. Again, after like an 8 to 9% increase last year.
Hey, almost all insurance is going up at least 9 or 10%, right?
You're right. Auto insurance and property insurance as well. It's really, it's rough. And health insurance, well, like auto and property insurance, it's a required cost. you have to offer health insurance. And once again, it's becoming a big issue. And, it's a problem. But I want to at least share what employers are doing to try and navigate their way around it.
Sure.
HSAs also are more popular than ever. That's another one that I'll mention. So
we have talked about that before, but I look forward to talking about it again. This stuff never gets, it's always, I don't know if it's always old or it never gets old, but it's always important.
I agree.
Gene Marks is a CPA who writes weekly on small business for The Guardian, The Hill, The Philadelphia Inquirer, The Washington Times, The Chicago Daily Herald, Forbes, and Entrepreneur. You can also hear him on ABC Radio's Eye on the World with John Batchelor. Gene hosts 2 small business podcasts with Paychex Corporation and The Hartford. This episode was brought to you by The Great Game of Business, which helps businesses use an open book management system to help build healthier companies. You can learn more at greatgame.com/21hats. Thank you, Gene.
Thank you, Lauren. We'll see you soon.
Have a great week, everybody.